I spent $3,500 on a 4K camera and then another $2,500 on a 6K camera. So in this video, we're going to take a look at both of them, see what are the pros and cons of each, and decide whether or not I wasted my money. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Jacob van Bosch, and I wouldn't really call myself a cinematographer. I'm more of a videographer, if that makes sense. I mainly do directing, writing, and editing, and then I also shoot music videos, promos, events, and corporate videos. I've also shot a couple of short films, but I think I'm still learning how to do composition and lighting, so I wouldn't really call myself that. But I have been shooting with Sony cameras for almost 3 years now, and I have shot with Blackmagic cameras before, mostly the a7SIIIs and the old school cinema camera, you remember those box ones. But we recently bought the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, and we're going to be comparing this camera to the Sony a7SIII. We're going to be seeing what are the differences between these two, and what am I going to be using the a7SIII for, and what am I going to be using the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro for. So let's get into it. Let's start with recording formats. So the Sony records internally to XAVC-S. It can record an all-I codec, and it can also record a HEVC codec or high efficiency codec. Blackmagic, on the other hand, either records Blackmagic RAW or ProRes 422 and variants of ProRes. Now, the big difference between these two cameras is obviously RAW is amazing and it just blows XAVC-S out of the water. On the Sony, you would usually shoot S-Log3, although they did recently add S-Cinetone to this camera. So I've been using S-Cinetone when I don't really need to grade all that much, but I'm still using S-Log3 for any sort of professional work where I am definitely going to be adding a lot of color in post. On the Blackmagic side, I've only really shot on the RAW setting because you can actually compress it to pretty small file sizes and still get a ton of quality out of it. In that case, it doesn't really matter what, picture profile we're shooting at because it's not baked in. But we have been just setting it to the new color Science 5 and then just chucking one of the internal LUTs on and then changing it in post. If we're talking about recording media though, the Sony records to SD cards, which I've been using the Lexar V90 128GB SD card, and at 4K I get between an hour and a half and 2 hours depending on the quality settings that I choose. On the Blackmagic, we've been using the Dalkin Juggler portable USB-C SSD to record all of our media onto. It does have a slot for SD card and CFast card, but the external SSD just works so easily and it's so much faster and easier to just connect to your computer and to offload. Okay, if we're talking about color, there's going to be a lot of debate with this. So we actually spoke about color in a video that we did about Blackmagic RAW versus ProRes RAW, which you can check out over here. And basically what we did is we attached our Atomos Ninja 5 to our Sony and recorded RAW onto that, and then compared the Blackmagic RAW to the ProRes RAW. So if you want to check out our findings on that, please go watch that video. And basically what we found is that the internal recording from the Sony was a little bit greener than the ProRes RAW recording. So I don't know if maybe the internal XAVC-S codec shifts a little bit more green, or maybe the ProRes shifts a little bit more magenta. But yeah, that's something that we found. We didn't really have that issue with the Blackmagic RAW, although a lot of people have suggested that the Blackmagic shifts a little bit blue. However, since we're shooting RAW, it's really easy to just change the color temperature anyways. We need to also talk about the issue with the Blackmagic screen. It's blue. It's terribly, terribly blue. It's really bad. Now, Blackmagic have said that that's a really easy fix. They're going to release a firmware update and it's going to be fine. So I'm not too worried because, again, we're shooting RAW. We can just change our color temperature if we do mess it up because we monitored incorrectly. You can still bring up your waveform, you can still bring up your histogram, and you can monitor it that way. The screen on the Sony, however, is not blue. It's not the highest resolution screen, but it's a really good screen and it flips out like this and then it tilts. So if you're a vlogger, you can use it like this. Or if you're a filmmaker and you need to shoot, you can tilt it down or you can tilt it up and you can get the shots that you need. The Blackmagic only tilts like the a7 III used to do. Now, I don't think this is an issue. I don't personally think that I need a flip out screen. I think that a tilt screen is actually super useful. And the fact that I'm now sort of stuck with the flips out screen, isn't the best for my specific scenarios, because as you can see, I've got these tabs for a strap. When I'm doing run and gun sort of shooting, I do attach my strap, and then the strap is always in the way of the screen. I have to either lift it over or put it underneath. And yeah, the screen is always in the way. Sometimes, I think it has a very unpopular opinion, but sometimes I think this camera would have been better with a tilt screen. So now let's talk about low light performance. I feel kind of silly saying that because this is the Sony a7S III. It goes to 409,000 ISO. You can see in the dark. Now, it's super noisy at 400,000 ISO, but you can go up there and you can probably clean it up in post. Whereas with the Blackmagic, the max you can go to is 25,600. And at that point, it's crazy grainy. It's unusable. In some scenarios, I can push the a7S III to 25,600 on maybe like S-Log3, and it's totally usable. It's totally fine. But yeah, so I think that's an unfair comparison, because also this is a full frame sensor and the Blackmagic has a super 35mm sensor. So it's a smaller sensor, it's not as light sensitive, and it's so much cheaper, honestly. But we'll get to that later. Another talking point is definitely autofocus. Again, the Sony blows it out of the water. There is literally no point in comparing it, because the Sony, you just like lift the camera in the direction of the face and it locks onto whoever's eye is the closest to you. It's insane how well the Sony autofocus works, and it just locks onto people, no problem. Whereas with the Blackmagic, its autofocus is a little bit strange. You have to sort of tap and hold, and then it'll focus. And then if the person moves, then it like freaks out, doesn't really know what it's doing anymore. So I don't really shoot any sort of autofocus with the Blackmagic, but you know what? I think that's fine, because the Blackmagic is a camera that was made, it's in the name, for cinema. The Sony was made as a prosumer camera to basically be an all-rounder. But we'll get to that. And then let's talk about ease of use. Now, both these cameras have sort of a similar body shape, sort of like that typical DSLR mirrorless camera. I mean, this is a mirrorless camera. Both of these technically are mirrorless cameras. So they have that shape where you put your hand over the battery grip and you can shoot like that. Both of them. However, the Blackmagic is a really big camera, as I'm sure you can see. I mean, I don't know, how do I compare these two together? How do I put these two next to each other? Even with the cage, the Blackmagic is just, it's huge. I think it would have been better off being a box. It could have been a 5-inch box, like the screen could still have been there. But the idea of it being a handle doesn't make sense to me. They could have made the top mounting points sturdier. They could have added a handle, and I think that would have just been a better shape for this camera, because it's a cinema camera. Okay, so we're gonna have to talk about battery life. The Sony has amazing battery life. Like, it's awesome actually. It uses these Sony NPFZ100 batteries. You can see them there. They last for like 4 hours, and they also work in a couple of Sony's cameras now. So I love these batteries. I think they're great. The Blackmagic uses these NPF style batteries, the thin ones, the 550 style, 570 style, and they just don't last as long. This one that came with the camera lasts around 30 to 40 minutes in our testing, and the Duracell replacement batteries that we got just don't last nearly as long. They basically last as long as the old Canon batteries that the 6K uses. Whereas the RAV Power batteries that we got for the Sony, which was sort of like the generic ones, do also last for 4 hours. So in terms of battery life, Sony takes it easy. But that being said, you can get a V-mount battery or even these bigger NPF 970 style batteries, and then connect that externally to the 6K and then they can last much longer. So there are battery options available. Next, we need to talk about the ND filters. The Blackmagic 6K Pro has built-in ND filters at 2, 4, and 6 stops. Now, sure, there's been some talk about there being like a slight blue shift at the ND6 range, but honestly, we're shooting RAW, we could just change the color temperature, it's not an issue. The Sony does not have that, so if you need a filter, you screw it onto the top of your lens or use like a matte box, and that's like a whole extra expense, which again, this camera is $1,000 more expensive than the Blackmagic, and the Blackmagic has built-in ND filters. That's saying something. And then let's also talk about the mount. The Sony camera obviously comes with the E-mount, and I love this mount. It's a super versatile mount. Since it's a mirrorless, you can just get an adapter and then you can attach Nikon lenses, you can attach Canon lenses, you can attach PL mount lenses. That's awesome. So I like the E-mount on the Sony. I'm not a big fan of the EF mount just because, you know, it's not very adaptable. There are kits available for the Blackmagic 6K that you can use to attach a PL mount lens to that camera, but I'm not sure if that's going to work on the 6K Pro just because, you know, there's the ND filter situation, so I don't know if the PL mount lens goes in there, it's going to like block and break, so I don't know if that's going to work. So that's why I do prefer the E mount on the Sony, just because it's a lot more adaptable. One thing that I do like about it though is that we're finally able to use the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 lens. This lens is so pretty. This lens is a really nice lens and it's just so much better than the f2.8. The only thing is that the Tamron 28-75 that I've got on here does reach a lot further because it's 75, and I think the 35 is like a 50mm equivalent. That's sort of one thing that I would say this lens totally makes the mount worth it. Although I really could just get an adapter and put it on this camera and just crop the sensor a little anyways. And that brings us to our conclusions. I feel like these two cameras can be used for similar jobs, but they will excel at different things. In my opinion, I'm going to be shooting all of my films and professional work on the Blackmagic from now on. And that's because we're going to be using a full team. We're going to be using a focus pooler. We're going to be using a dedicated DOP. We're going to be using a dedicated colorist at the end. We're going to be using a DIT who can manage all the data. We are upgrading all aspects of our productions. And that's why we're going to be using the Blackmagic, because RAW is just amazing. And the fact that you can do 6K RAW on the Blackmagic is even better. Now, I'm not saying resolution is everything. I'm not saying resolution makes things better. I don't think it's a cheat. I think it's a tool that you can use in your arsenal. If you do need to punch in, you can. Even on 4K, really, you can punch in. When am I going to be using the Sony, though? I'm going to be using the Sony when I don't have a team, when it's just me, when I'm shooting my music videos alone, when I'm doing a documentary alone, when I'm out there and I need something that can do a lot of the thinking for me, I'm going to be using the Sony. That's sort of my conclusions. I'm going to be using them for different things, but I am going to be using both. I'm not disappointed with my Sony. I'm not disappointed with my Blackmagic. I think they both serve a purpose. I think they're both going to take the level of work to the next level, and I'm really excited to use both. So if you disagree with me and you think that I'm wasting $3,500 or 65,000 Rand on the Sony and I should sell that to buy accessories for the Blackmagic, let me know in the comments if you think I've wasted my time with the Blackmagic because the Sony basically does everything that the Blackmagic does except for the ND filters and the 6K. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. But if you enjoyed that video, please smash the like button. It really does help us out and it gets this video out to more people. So please do that for me. And you know, while you're down there, might as well just hit subscribe. We release a lot of videos on filmmaking, that is editing, writing, behind the scenes, podcasts, you name it. Just go check out our channel and then hit subscribe when you're ready. We'll be here. But that's going to be it for this video from me, Jaco van Bosch. Until next time, go out there, stay safe, make your movie.